welcome to the Overrun Podcast. My name is Ed Bowder.
I'm Dan Schwester.
And today we have the head of the International Association of EMS Chiefs, Dan Gerard, is joining us again. Hey, Dan.
Hey, how's it going, gentlemen?
Doing well. We wanted to talk to you today because recently, I guess in August, the Chiefs put out a statement on whole blood, and the data is starting to kind of reflect that the use of whole blood is better than the previous available options. Dan and I have a couple stickers and patches that say whole blood over pasta water, that whole thing we talked about with Andrew Fisher months ago. But we want to jump right into it because the statement was very strongly worded, which I think is very important. So I wanted to introduce the listeners to what the statement was, what the data is, and where you guys were going with your position statement.
Sure, absolutely. So when we initially came out with the statement, we had worked previously with Dr. John Holcomb. And for those who don't know Dr. Holcomb, he's a renowned trauma surgeon, devoted his career to the U.S. military resuscitation of our combat soldiers, Marines, sailors. And, this was in the forefront of his transition back into the civilian sector. There's a book that's out. It's called Zero Trauma Deaths, and it's put out by the National Academy of Sciences. And it talked about how we can do things better, what we were doing, what we weren't doing, how to leverage the system better in order to facilitate resuscitation. And so when Dr. Holcomb came out of the service, he was working with other members of the community, of the civilian community. Dr. John Kramer, who had just retired as the EMS director for NHTSA EMS. And Dr. Kramer, I don't think a lot of people realize was an emergency medicine physician, actually got his start as an EMT up in Michigan, like back in the 70s, if you can appreciate that. Yeah. And they were pushing, they were gathering the science that existed at that time. And, they were really trying to push this forward. The military, looked at trying to get whole blood back during the initial stages of the Afghanistan war. The whole thing was, how can we give this to our forward combat troops, people that are out on patrol, etc., so that they could institute blood in the field. And they were using a different product instead, freeze-dried plasma, which we actually invented, but sometime after the Korean War, we stopped using. The Germans, the French, and the Israelis really did a great job with advancing the technology and making a more robust product. And we picked it back up in the Gulf War. But realistically, they wanted to give like every medic on the ground a unit of blood. It's just how do you keep it temperature controlled? And and this is an idea that has been bandied about since the 1960s. If we could get blood to people in the field, but it was always the technology issue. You would need essentially a good humor truck to go along with the ambulance on every emergency response. And so we saw this as a critical issue. There were other places around the country that had implemented this. Now, I will tell you that San Antonio Fire Department, when they first started their blood program, they had a little bit of a leg up on everybody because they have Lackland Air Force Base there, which is it's the only military level 1 trauma center in the United States. And they take people from outside the community. It's just not, it's not only military folk that go there. So anybody can be transported to Lackland. And they were able to leverage their expertise, advances in technology, and it was the right things at the right time. And once they started proving proof of concept, and more docs started to transition out of the field, and we started to see more of these blood programs popping up around the United States. It was just the way to go. We had to we had to support this. This is the next thing. This is like 12 leads were like back in the 90s, right? So Ed, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you.
Ed, you got on mute.
3 and 2. And certainly as time goes on, new medicine isn't really new at all, right? We always hear about, oh, well, we've been doing this for 30 years and it's worked in our system. But, oh, well, it didn't work. It worked in California. It didn't work in New York or whatever. The statement that the chiefs have made of saying, like, this is the standard of care now. This is what we should do. One of the things that I just want to talk to you real quick before we delve into more of the details about it is what's your response to the difficulty of procurement and then to storage, or is that something that people just kind of complain about, but there's already a known solution?
There are known solutions to that. I think the issue is on a local level, what is going to be accepted, because every blood bank might have their own particular brand or product or process that they want utilized. And I think that as we begin to flesh this out, I spoke with a vendor. I spoke at EMS World, and I spoke with a vendor, and I said, look, they said, where do we need to be? And I said, this is where you need to be. You need to come up with a comprehensive blood plan so that if an EMS agency in rural Wyoming or the Cleveland Department of EMS or the Miami Beach Fire Department wants to institute blood, you have the technology for storage in the ambulance, for storage in the station. You have all those requisite parts that need to go together. I mean, I kind of envy the guys in New Jersey a little bit, because in hospital-based systems, this might be a lot easier. And especially when you talk about places like Jersey City, Newark, Patterson, where they have trauma centers, where the paramedic units are hospital based, it'll be easier for them to figure out and come up with the solution. But the templates that are being developed across the United States, as I said, San Antonio Fire. Another great guy is Peter Antevi, who's down in Miami Beach, emergency medicine doc, medical director for the fire department. I think he's got like 5 or 6 departments that he's working with, and he's the medical director that they're doing this with. And Peter is such a great person. Like, he'll give you the shirt off his back.
He really is. He's been on the show a couple times. We're big fans of his.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
He is absolutely. So, those parts and those logistical pieces are there. A lot of this has to do with the will of the, organizational leadership. My question always is not if I'm going to do something, how? How do I make this happen? And I think that your more progressive leaders kind of go in that direction.
And we've had conversations previously where the lack of will in leadership or in progression is really the nidus for this show. I think we're naturally kind of resistant to change, and there's always someone who will say, like, well, the data just isn't extant enough for me to start changing practice, or it's too expensive, or it's whatever. One of the things that I thought was important in the statement that you all made was, listen, all of that put aside, like, this is what we have to do. So now that we know that we have to do it, it's kind of like the first step to solving a problem is admitting that there is one.
Yeah.
Right. So putting out a statement like that, like, listen, this is strongly worded. This is, no nonsense. It's like, this is what we have to do. And certainly in areas where you have, like, serious penetrating traumas, like you mentioned, Jersey City and Newark, where, filling these people with lactated ringers, which we've been doing for 40 years, just isn't fixing them. And and Dan, you and I have talked about this before. it's interesting that the conversation is almost like, well, if you're losing blood, a layperson would say, well, we probably have to give them blood. But it feels like in medicine, we're like, no, no, no. See, if they lose blood, what we can do is we can take all of these different fractured parts and put them all together. And it feels like there's like it's like a Rube Goldberg machine, and then over here is just a bag of blood.
Sure. And we really have to conceptualize this in a matter of, we can't make this about ego or individual departments. If we need to regionalize services for administration of blood, because I'm going to be perfectly honest, there's going to be a small department in Idaho that, if they look at it, everybody's volunteer. Some guy is coming in and he runs the local hardware store, but he's the elected chief for the organization. Having a full-time blood product manager isn't going to happen. And so, we really have to think about how we're going to partner with other people, and then having those other organizations, blood banks and hospitals, how they're going to partner with us to ensure success. I think back, when you read the book, The Paramedics, or if you ever had the opportunity to talk to Jim Page, he talks about how they had these bake sales to start paramedic units, because the defibrillator, was like 40 pounds. The telemetry unit was like another 25 or 30 pounds. It was these big pieces of technology that they couldn't afford. And then the training that they had, I mean, you couldn't do this today. Guys volunteered to go to the training. They worked for a paid department. They volunteered to go to the training. So all the department had to do was pay for their training, find the money to pay for their training. That wouldn't happen today.
No, and I think that, again, it's a missed opportunity for organizations to not keep their staff as up to date on the current medicine as they possibly can. So that the background in logistics we've talked about. Let's go in a little bit to the physiology of this. Simply put, we've talked about this a couple of times. If you're losing blood, lactated ringers and saline is just not going to resuscitate you. But
it's actually going to hurt you down the road.
Right, exactly.
Oh, so absolutely. They don't stay in the vascular space as long. And normal saline, I'll give lactated ringers a little bit more props than normal saline. Ringers will stay in the vascular space a little bit longer, but saline just pours out of you and increases your acidosis. Like, why would you want to give it? But we have places around the country that are giving these fluids, ad hominem.
Well, even ATLS has changed their tune, so to speak. It used to be they wanted like 2 liters of crystalloid before considering blood. Now they've changed that, and they're starting to think about, you can give some crystalloid, but if you're giving crystalloid, you should be thinking about blood or blood products. And that was a stem change. But I don't know that it's still trickling down. But the idea of, blood products as opposed to crystalloid is the science is there. I mean, we've got 20 years of studies coming out of the military that show the benefits. We know that, even whole blood is better than component therapy.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing that we also need to consider is that early initiation of blood, we know, reduces ICU time. It improves surgical outcomes. We have less end organ damage that occurs. And I don't think so we know that there are studies that absolutely prove the effectiveness. I think the real proof is going to come when we have so many organizations that are doing this, and then we start to do the studies and we look at length of stay, morbidity, and mortality, and we start to do those comparisons on outcomes. Now we absolutely know that it works. But then once we have those numbers, we'll have a better appreciation, and we'll be scratching our heads. We'll be saying to ourselves, like, why didn't we do this sooner?
Well, and like I said earlier, it's fascinating to me whenever we have this, whenever we run into these kinds of problems where it's the answer seems very obvious. Again, like if you're losing blood, it seems to stand to reason that the thing you would need is blood. And looking back, over the past 15, 20 years, where it was like, oh, well, we have component therapy, we can give FFP or we can give plasma, whatever. And even then, it's like, well, okay, well, why are you giving a unit of packed cells when you could just give blood? Like it feels like like I said, it feels like taking extra steps to get to an easier result. So it always felt very counterproductive to me.
Yeah, absolutely. We see this reticence in other parts of medicine when when new therapies and new ideas come in. We kind of saw this. There was a lot of hesitance. I don't know if you remember when thrombolytics were first being given in the hospital, and there was this whole talk about paramedics giving thrombolytics in the field. And there were so many of us within the profession that were throwing our hands up and saying, no, you can't do this. And then there were these nascent little programs across the United States that started to do it. They would go through the checklist, they would administer thrombolytics, and they saw these really large improvements in outcomes, reduced lengths of stay, just better outcomes overall. And then angioplasty became the thing, and we forgot all about thrombolytics. We don't talk about it anymore, right? So, but it's the same sort of thing, like we kind of go through these cycles. It's almost predictable,
Right.
And as a matter of fact, if we if we were off the air, we could probably point to the people that would be champions, and we probably could point to the people that would be the names.
Oh, absolutely.
For anything that you want to bring forward.
We know those people, yeah.
Yeah.
But like it's interesting, and again, like we're all going down to this conference this week, and it feels like every year there's like a very item, right? Like whatever 7-10 years ago they're like, oh, did you hear we're bringing mass trousers back, like that kind of stuff, or like, oh, we figured out a new way to use this medication, or epinephrine doesn't work except when it does, but we shouldn't stop using it, but we should, like, it's every year there's like a new topic. So, but I feel like, and this is just an anecdote, I feel like we've heard whole blood rolling out to trucks for years, and it's always been, well, wait, we haven't gotten approval from whatever NAEMSP, or we haven't gotten approval from whatever NAEMT, like professional organizations haven't given their sign off on it. And to me, it always felt kind of like kicking the can down the road, which is I feel like a forceful statement, like, no, we're doing this. And like, it's kind of like, all right, we can do away with all the pretense. This is the standard. This is what we should do. If you're not doing it, you're behind the times. Kind of get with it. So from that position, how do it's difficult to encourage change, but what kind of steps can you take if you're just in an organization and you're like, listen, I understand that whole blood is the new thing now. How do you bring that to management? How do you bring that to leadership? How does someone start that conversation with the team to try and bring them up to the current data?
Well, one of the things I want to point out to you, Dr. Kramer and Dr. Holcomb started this pre-hospital blood transfusion initiative coalition, and it brings, it's IAEMSC, it's NAEMT, it's NAEMSP. It's like all the alphabet organizations, bringing them together, and everybody is on the same page moving forward. So in regards to policy process, there is a large group of people that want to advance this and move it forward. On a local level, if I was, still working in the field in New Jersey, I would start gathering my articles. I would start, if you look at our position statement, we have some practical example, like we mentioned Delaware and Peter Antevi. There's a bunch of stuff you could just pull, every day you could just pull down line from Peter, of the successes that they're having. And then the clinical articles that exist. And then, like I said, the National Academy of Sciences book is a free download. It's a PDF. If you want the hardcover, you have to pay for it. But it's, a national trauma care system. And, they talk about, what are some of the things that we have to do to advance the system of care. And the most important thing is to find the champion, either within your organization or within your organization's milieu. So maybe maybe you don't have a strong trauma doctor within your system, but maybe within another system there is a doc that you can find. I thought one of the goofiest things in the entire world. I had a part-time job. I used to work up at St. Barnabas Medical Center before it was like this huge conglomerate, right? It was like just one hospital.
It was just St. Barnabas. Yep.
And Dr. Nance, who was he was the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Trauma, was at Barnabas. He was a practicing doc at Barnabas. Now, he had worked at other trauma centers and stuff like that, but Barnabas was not a trauma center.
Right.
And he was the editor. But if you went to him and you said, we need to be doing this, he would be right on top of it. He was right there. So identifying those champions within your organization and even outside your organization. Make friends with the people in the blood bank. How can we do this? This is, is this possible here? San Antonio will share their policies, processes. They'll give you their equipment list. We talked about Peter Antevi. There's a bunch of places, around the United States that are doing this that will gladly share the things that they that they've compiled over a period of time. And so if you kind of, it's one of those sort of things. I learned this a long time ago. There was a guy, Barry Straub. He was the chief medical officer for the Centers for Medicare Services. And everybody was going to him as, like the AAA, and everybody was like, give me money, give me money, give me more money, give me more money. And we went to him and we said, this is the problem. And he kind of like looked at us and he was waiting for us to say, give us money. And we said to him and said, this is how you solved it. And then he kind of like sat down for a second and he looked at us. So then he invited us down to do a presentation at Health and Human Services. And they've got like all these like big wigs, like, assistant secretaries and undersecretaries and all this other stuff. And when we got done with the presentation, it was me, Larry Tan, who was in Delaware, and Ben Posadlo, who's up in Massachusetts. When we got done with the presentation down there, they turned around and said to us, they said, we are going to include EMS and innovations in healthcare grants. Because we solved the problem for them.
Yeah.
And they saw the value. And that's the same. And the point of that story is, if you go with all the information, if you go with a path forward, if you have like, this is the equipment we would need. At that point, like if I'm the boss of the organization, my ability to say no kind of gets reduced.
Right. And no one wants to do, and especially in leadership, no one wants to do any extra work on top of the workload they already have. So if you come, and this has been a topic on the show previously, but if you come in and you're like, here's a problem and I think I fixed it, let's do that. I think a lot of leadership is going to be, more agreeable to the idea. I want to dovetail into ethics real quick before we get out of here. The World Health Organization defines equal access to life-saving intervention as a human right. Which is something that's mentioned in the position statement as well. So I guess in this type of setting, are there ethical concerns that we have to get through in order to start administering whole blood? Like again, the roadblocks thing. Is there an issue with low titer O whole blood, or like getting blood from blood banks? Are there any type of ethical issues that they might run into, or is the World Health Organization defining this equal access thing? Is that kind of an inroad to making a blood program more popular?
Well, in regards to, when you think about this, you're going to be drawing down on blood from blood banks. And we hear about the shortages all the time. And, there will be a call on the news that they're going to have a blood drive and that they desperately need blood and they're trying to bring people into the system. And so the first thing I think that we need to do as ethical stewards, and something that we don't do well, but that this is probably an opportunity for us now to step up and do better, is community engagement. And either start a blood bank as a satellite of the local blood bank, have those community blood drives, because think about it, our biggest issue is the fact that the community really doesn't understand a lot of what we do and how the system works.
Right.
And this is another opportunity for us that we can create, that we can control, and that we can get the message out. I talked to Huey Reinhardt. I wrote an article, I don't know, like 30 years ago, about the Clinton Healthcare Initiative. And I picked up the phone and I called Huey Reinhardt at Princeton. And he answered the phone, right? He was the guy who wrote this. He's like one of the most famous healthcare economists in the world. And I talked to him for like a couple of hours. And at one point he said to me, he goes, well, the ambulance, he goes, paying for the ambulance isn't a big deal. He goes, it's volunteer, right? Because he was at Princeton,
Right.
So like all the ambulances were volunteer. And that was like a whole different discussion. But here was a guy, he was the foremost health economist in the world, and he thought it was free, So now this is our opportunity to meet with the people that we serve every day. So that would be the first thing I would say, is that community engagement, helping to do those things in order for us to get blood. The people that we overwhelmingly take care of are socially and economically disenfranchised members of society.
I think that's a really interesting point, is making it a community, I don't want to say a community problem, but a community issue, where the problem, it's not so much like, the problem is that the hospital and the medic units don't have blood. The problem is that the community of this town doesn't have that available to them. I think that's a really interesting framing.
And just to point out, some of these programs that have adopted whole blood, I want to say it's San Antonio. In their region, they've identified donors who are low titer O, and they actually they make a big deal over them. They're like heroes. They encourage donation, and they're collecting from the community. They're investing the community in the project. I thought that was really interesting in some of the reading I've done on whole blood. And if it's not San Antonio, I apologize.
No, absolutely. And this is a hugely important topic. And the position statement is one of the better ones that I've read. It's very, I don't want to say simply written, it's very obviously written, where we've established this problem. Now it's time that we fix it. Dan Gerard, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to talk about whole blood, getting out into the community. We'll see you down in Atlantic City. And for The Overrun, I'm Ed Bowder. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys soon.